Okay, Rome has fallen, and not it's not a pretty sight. We've talked about the barbarian invasions and all the different things that went into causing Rome to collapse. We're going to review those real quickly. Then we're going to talk about the period known as the Middle Ages, also known as the Dark Ages. There's some question over to how long it really lasted. We will discuss that as we go along, but we're mostly going to be focusing on the earliest and at least the strongest of the barbarian kingdoms that spring up after Rome in the country of what is now modern day France. So just to kind of go back on the fall of Rome a little bit. With the fall of Rome, you have a decline in trading commerce. Okay, people are scared. There's not as much around. They kind of keep to themselves. Decline of city and urban life. You keep having these barbarian hordes come through and they attack and they tear everything down. People say have had enough and they leave. They go out into the countryside and seek protection from wealthy landowners. It's decline in learning in the arts because people are more concerned, as I've said many times before, with keeping body and soul together. They don't have time for creativity. You have a decline of central governments, that power vacuum we talked about. Chaos is rampant throughout the empire, caused by that power vacuum, and survival becomes people's primary concern. Just keeping body and soul together, just trying to make it through a day and have enough to eat. This is people's primary concern. I'm going to look at a little bit on geography now. So Europe's location and resources help determine the groups of people who settle there, and then the people who try to control it. Okay, it's on the western end of what is known as the Eurasian landmass, extends from present-day Portugal to China, that's what Eurasia does. Parts of what is now Great Britain, Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and a whole lot of Eastern Europe all had been part of the Roman Empire. Okay, Europe has a lot of natural resources, dense forests, with valuable timber, covered much of the northern parts, the areas of Germany, Poland, northern France, and then farther north into Scandinavia. And the area's fertile soil is well suited for raising crops, especially the northern areas of France and Germany and Poland, and even into what is now the modern day Russia and Ukraine, because it's flat, open land. In addition, there's a huge bed of iron and coal that lay untapped underneath the Earth's surfaces, basically stretching from Ireland across under the seas, across into Germany, and all the way into Poland. Okay, and this is a huge source of natural resources that will eventually be tapped into as we go along. Oceans and seas provide a lot of resources. People live on the coast, fish, and it's also a great means for trade and transportation. And you have several large rivers that also provide food and a means of travel. The Roman roads are still there. That's one of Rome's significant, at least geographical, contributions, and it allows Roman customs and Christianity to spread throughout Europe. The Germanic tribes that overrun Europe between 400 and 700 effectively end Roman rule, but then they have to come up with something else. Okay, and this is just kind of to give you an idea of the maps. You can see Europe around the 5th century. Okay, you can see that the Eastern Empire over here is still in being, but the Western Empire, the areas of what we know as Italy and France and Spain and Germany, have fragmented and are run by a whole lot of different people, and the borders are constantly changing with new invasions and things like that. Okay, so as I said, the Roman Empire still exists. It later becomes known as the Byzantine Empire, but during its time, the people who lived there referred to themselves as Romans. It was based in Constantinople. It's this whole area, kind of in the light tannish color, extends well into Egypt, all of the modern-day Middle East, what is known as modern-day Turkey, Greece, and up as far north as the Danube River into Eastern Europe. Okay, the West, again, fragments out, but then as time goes by, you start to have some stronger kingdoms grow up. Yeah, the most prominent one of these is going to be the kingdom of the Franks, which we will spend a little bit of time talking about next. Okay, so the Franks and the Moors. The Franks become important because right around the time that all of this is happening, a little bit later in the time frame in the 7th century, you begin to have great expansion among the Arabs, fueled by Islam. Islam is founded by Muhammad in the early 7th century, and by the middle of the 8th century, they have conquered most of what is modern-day Iraq, Iran, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, all of North Africa, and Spain. And they fight their way north into what is modern-day France. And there's a major battle fought in a place called Tours, and the Arab tide is halted and eventually rolled back by a group of Germanic warriors led by a man named Charles Martel, who are known as the Franks. So where did they come from? Okay, the Frankish people, they're a German people, actually, even though the French today and the Germans, through a lot of the modern history that we know of, have been at war. They're actually cousins, okay? These are the people that overran the Roman Empire. They're warriors, they're farmers, they're herders, and their culture is vastly different from Rome. Okay, they're governed by unwritten laws, where the Romans had written laws, customs, and they're ruled by elected kings. They elect the guy in charge. It's not just somebody who has the most power deciding he's going to be in charge. From about 400 to 700, they divide up Europe and fight over various controls. And during this time, the Franks emerge as the most powerful and successful tribe in Gaul, or modern-day France. That's who it's named after. The first of these great Frankish leaders is Clovis. Okay, he becomes king, and he's best known because he's the first of these guys to convert to Christianity, and it gains him an ally in the Christian church because the church is on the rise. It is filling the power vacuum that we've talked about. I mentioned the Battle of Tours a minute ago. Clovis's grandson, Charles Martel, defeats the Muslims at Tours, France, right in here. Okay. This is Tours. The Muslims had invaded up out of Spain. Unstoppable army, defeating everyone in the path till they are met by Charles and his army, and they defeat the Muslims, and the Muslims advanced no farther than Spain. And had the Muslims won, you probably would have had a dramatic change in how Europe develops. You wouldn't have had the power of the Catholic Church playing such a vast and huge role in the future. Charles Martel gets the nickname Charles the Hammer because he's the hammer of the Moors, and he defeats them, and he begins what's known as the Carolingian dynasty. His grandson Charles will rule for over 40 years, and he is probably the most significant ruler of this period of the Middle Ages. And he goes, and his name for history is Charlemagne. You may have heard of him if you've ever watched the third Indiana Jones movie. Sean Connery makes reference to him. Okay, Charlemagne is German for Carol Magna, or Latin for Carol Magna. It's translated into Charles the Great or Charles Magnum by today's words. Okay, so during the 800s, Charlemagne, a Frankish king, builds an empire that stretches across modern France, Germany, and into part of Italy. In 800, the Pope calls for his help against rebellious nobles in Rome. Charles answers the call, and he defeats them in battle, and to show his gratitude, the Pope crowns Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor, the descendant of the great Roman emperors. Slightly different territory. He has Italy, France, Germany, and the idea was that it would unite the Christian church and the empire under one head, kind of co-ruling with the Pope. The Holy Roman Empire lasts for centuries, well into the 16th and 17th century, till it's eventually overtaken. And it's kind of more of a loose amalgamation of countries with the one emperor at the head of it. Okay, so after he's named emperor, he strengthens his rule, and he attempts to create a united Christian Europe. Working very closely with the church, he helps to spread Christianity through a lot of different ways. He also, whether intentionally or not, he creates what becomes the system of government in Europe that will last for the next 400 or 500 years. It's known as feudalism. Okay, he appoints local nobles to rule local areas. He calls these men counts, and the areas they rule are called counties. He gives them land, and in return, they're supposed to help him with defense of the empire. He also has a system like inspector generals that he sends out to keep an eye on things. He also encourages learning, so you start to have learning coming back. Sets up schools to ensure education of government officials, establishes library where scholars can copy the ancient texts, including the Bible, most importantly, but also the science and history texts that still survive from Rome. Okay. When he dies in 814, his empire quickly falls apart because Frankish tradition says that you divide it up amongst your sons. He has 4 of them, so he breaks it all up. Eventually, one of his grandsons get together 30 years later, and they divide it into 3 separate kingdoms. But he has lasting influence. Okay, his strong government is a model for future medieval rulers and even rulers into the later times of the 16th and 17th century. And he's extremely influential in the spread of Christianity throughout Germany and even into what is modern-day Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, Finland. Okay, he establishes parishes with local priests. Invites scholars from all over Europe to teach in his kingdom, and he develops what's known as the Carolingian minuscule. Okay, Romans used only capital letters. Charlemagne is the guy that develops, under his tutelage at least, the lowercase letters that combine with the 22 letters of the Romans. We still use these today, and we've added obviously 4 more letters. Okay, so this is what Charlemagne's empire looks like in 814. You can see how it was divided among his 3 grandchildren. You have the blue is basically modern-day Germany with a little bit more onto it. The red in the central is parts of Western Germany, but mostly northern Italy, a little bit over into France, and then the green is mostly what makes up modern-day France. So Charlemagne, very influential. We're going to look at in the next video what feudalism is. Be prepared to do a bell ringer on Charlemagne and his empire tomorrow in class.